I've been hearing all my life that negotiation and selling are two important skills to have. And unfortunately, it's not taught in the Indian education system at all, neither at the school level nor at the college level.
The most dangerous negotiation is the one you don't know you're in.
I define it very simply, Ayush. I define it as problem solving.
When you're an FBI hostage negotiator, you deal with the mad, the bad, and the sad. To quote Tom Strentz, the godfather of the FBI's hostage negotiation program.
Those resource decisions and allocations are buried underneath about 50 meters of emotion, misunderstanding, and things that the other side doesn't know.
If I can make the shift, the hard part is to shift into a positive mindset.
I like to say, is that how you want to play this? You're anchoring, you're doing good cop, bad cop, the nibble, the snow job.
If you think that successful negotiations are successful because of logic or arguments or reason or compromise, you're losing money. You're leaving millions of dollars on the table.
I don't really have time for that. I'm not a fan of hardball tactics. That seasoned negotiators don't use them. The best way to become more influential is to give power rather than take it. The only big mistake you'll ever make is the one you don't learn from.
So, welcome, Ben, and thank you so much for being on the podcast. I am super excited to talk to you today, and especially because I've been hearing all my life that negotiation and selling are two important skills to have. And unfortunately, it's not taught in the Indian education system at all, neither at the school level nor at the college level. In fact, no one fundamentally gets any formal training, I'm assuming, even outside India to a large extent. And when it comes to the professional career or professional life, especially for the management graduates, negotiation is a super important skill. So while I attended your classes this year, actually gave me a different whole perspective on negotiation. And it really gave me the nuances about planning on negotiation rather than just going into commercial war, right? So today, the agenda of the podcast is very simple. My audience is between 18 to 24. We want to provide them with actionable insights over good negotiation. And even before that, we would want to tell them that what fundamentally negotiation means. Because I think a lot of people in India or in general confuse negotiation only with commercial negotiation. I understand that it's a zero-sum game, which fundamentally means that either you are winning or I am winning, right? It's not like a collective or integrative negotiation, right? So that's the agenda, and I'm super excited to have it today on the scene. So as I said, I think negotiation is always be confused as a zero-sum game, which fundamentally means that either I am losing or and you are gaining, and you are gaining and I am losing. But I know now after attending your course that it's much more than a zero-sum game, and especially when it comes to commercial negotiation. I would fundamentally try to understand how do you define negotiation in the first place?
I define it very simply, Ayush. I define it as problem solving. It's often that we are in a buying or selling context, and when we watch negotiation on television or in movies, or we learn about it in the news, peace deals and so forth, we often think about it as winning or losing. We think about it as competition. We think about it as bargaining. And that may be true in many cases, especially early in our career, if we are in a supply chain or we're a purchasing agent for a company. But if you think about it in more broad terms, if you think about it as simply problem solving, it opens up a whole new world, a whole new set of principles and tactics and tools that allow us to make much better deals, that allow us to accomplish our goals more readily.
Can you define problem solving for me?
Well, I think to begin, problem solving means problem identification. You always have to understand what your purpose is. If my purpose is to buy a car, for example, that's pretty clear. That's pretty clear. I need to buy a car. I want to get the best car. I want to get it for the lowest price. That's pretty objective. But let's say my purpose is to resolve a dispute with a colleague that I'm angry with, and it involves financial resources, that involves political capital, it involves social capital. Maybe I have 3 or 4 different purposes. And if I don't understand what my purpose is at the beginning, if I don't understand my top priority, then I might get sideways in that conversation and fail to accomplish my number one objective. So I think that problem solving begins with problem definition and prioritization. Again, this gets much more complicated when negotiations go beyond a single issue and when they go beyond a bargaining context.
Understood. So first step is problem identification. Are there many more steps to negotiation?
Yeah, I think the steps to problem identification are just for you as an individual to be prepared, to step back and say, okay, what are the 2 or 3 things that I'm trying to accomplish? What are the intangibles? What are the emotional pitfalls that I need to avoid? Is my ego going to get in the way? Is it going to lead me to making a bad decision or leave money on the table? I think those are some of the deeper elements of preparation.
Okay, so just to iterate, what you said is that negotiation is just not about commercial agreements and it's not a zero-sum game. It's about problem solving. And by problem solving, you mean that there is a certain kind of implied benefit that both the parties in the negotiation are having, to understand that and to fundamentally be in a position in which we both can achieve our integrative benefits, in which you might also be able to take away what you need. And same is the case with me as well, right?
Hopefully.
And the first step to that is problem identification, in which when I, as an individual, stepping into any negotiation, I should have all my agendas cleared. That these are 4 reasons I would want to go with this negotiation, and these are the top priorities. This is something I'm ready to trade off with. This is something I'm not ready to trade off with, right? Am I right? Am I missing something?
You're absolutely right, Ayush. I think that understanding what good looks like before you go in allows you to avoid making a bad decision or a bad deal, or making a deal that you shouldn't make.
Understood. Cool. So now I think my next question to you, Ben, is that what are the different types of negotiation except for commercial negotiation?
Okay. So think about negotiations as in the non-commercial world. Let's say you're in an organization and you've got a team that you're working in, and maybe you have some issues with a team member. Maybe you have some issues with your boss, and they are preventing you from getting along. They're preventing the team from reaching its objectives. Maybe it's not functioning as a team. Maybe it's functioning more as a group of individuals. Each side has a perspective on the problem. Each side has interests. Each side has concerns. Each has objectives and strengths and weaknesses. There are almost always resources involved. And eventually we need to divide up resources, right? Who's going to get the project lead? Who's going to get the promotion? Who's going to pay for the new software? But oftentimes those resource decisions and allocations are buried underneath about 50 meters of emotion, misunderstanding, and things that the other side doesn't know. So problem solving is a way to drill through all that, eliminate the emotions, surface the hidden information, and then make the optimal resource allocation. So that would be an example of a non-bargaining kind of negotiation that we would find ourselves in frequently in the workplace.
Understood. So one is a commercial negotiation or a bargaining negotiation, and other is a non-bargaining negotiation, which has other non-commercial benefits that one might be fighting for, right?
So think of bargaining as buying or selling something. Buying or selling something may be connected to a host of other issues that may be non-quantitative. It's in those multi-issue negotiations then when it becomes less about buying and selling, it may be more about resolving differences or concerns or solving problems that is confronting one side or the other. And what we often misunderstand that the buying and selling is not always just on a single issue, right? If I buy a car, it might be on the price only. But if I'm buying a set of services, there may be 10 or 12 other issues besides the actual price of the service. There may be the length of the service. There may be the terms. There may be, some kind of service element or guarantee. There may be a host of other things that need to be brought in. And so buying and selling, really, it's more about how many issues are at play and whether they're quantitative or qualitative.
Understood. So, Ben, I have a small request actually. Can you please help us with two examples of a bargaining or a commercial negotiation, which is fundamentally buying and selling, and second is a non-bargaining negotiation? And how should one identify, because you talked about problem solving, how should one identify that what are the implied benefits the other individual is looking at entering into the negotiation?
Let's say you're going to rent an apartment, all right? You're going to rent an apartment in the first part of your career after you finish your schooling, your high school years. Well, what are the terms of that deal? Probably just price of the monthly payment, right? Your monthly rent. And then there may be the length of the contract. Those are still fairly simple terms. And in that setting, this is really about bargaining and trying to claim as much value as possible. You're trying to get the apartment for the lowest price possible and for the most favorable terms in terms of the length of the deal. Maybe you want a more short term, maybe your landlord wants a longer term. But what you're trying to do is get as much as you can for yourself. And right, because then it becomes a zero sum. The more money you spend on the apartment, the less money you have for yourself, and vice versa. This is what we describe in terms of classic distributive negotiation. One side's gain is the other side's loss. All right, so that would be a commercial negotiation that I would assume that your audience will find itself in, if not now, then very soon. Let's take another more advanced negotiation that has problem-solving elements in it. Let's say you finish at Masters Union, which you will be soon, and you now find yourself in the job market. Okay. When you're negotiating your first job, or your second, or your 10th, or your 20th job, there will be elements of buying and selling. There will be elements that are inherently distributive, right? The salary, the base salary, is a zero sum. The more money you have, the less money the shareholders, the owners have. However, embedded within that distributive term, there are a host of other things that are non-quantitative, right? For example, I bike to work. I live close enough to my office here at Purdue University that I don't have to drive if I want. I can ride my bicycle. Now, can you put a quantitative price tag on that? No, and not the person next door to me cannot stand riding a bike. Would never get on a bike in a million years. So this is part of the intangible valuation of things that differs from person to person, which creates opportunities for mutual gains, or what we call integrative negotiation. Integrative negotiation means that we are trying to expand the pie, not just divide the pie. That we both have an interest in the organization being more profitable because there's more profits to share. So, for example, in a job offer negotiation, you both want the company to be more profitable, right? That means there's more money for everybody, more promotions, more enjoyment, more success. But there are idiosyncratic preferences of both sides. So maybe, for example, I want to be able to bike to work, and maybe my employer has some priorities on what assignment that I have. What project do I work on? Do they want me to be able to focus on this particular project coming in at the beginning in the first 90 days? Well, maybe there's an opportunity for us to trade on that. Maybe my boss will give me the location so that I can bike to work, and that I'll give my boss my full commitment for these first 90 days on this particular project. And so then it becomes about creating and adding value to the other party rather than just claiming value. So that's kind of the fundamental difference between distributive and integrative negotiation. When you begin to add multiple terms of a deal and terms of the deal that are non-quantitative, then you get into chances and opportunities to create value for both sides that increase the overall value of a deal, that are not win-loss. These are win-win negotiations. So even when we're buying and selling, I'm ultimately selling my labor to my employer, correct? But we're creating a long-term partnership. And so the satisfaction of needs and the solving of problems gets integrated, mixed in with the fundamentally distributive aspects of my selling of my labor to this employer.
Understood. I think I got a good clarity over what's integrative distribution and distributive negotiation. Sorry. But I just reiterate and pose that I have a couple of follow-up questions as well. What you defined as different type of negotiation was fundamentally a bargaining negotiation, or which is a buying and selling, and a non-bargaining negotiation, which are probably other aspects of human nature, other elements that would be like something that from a human perspective, right? Something might be important to a human. Or you give a definition of saying that any negotiation can either be a distributive negotiation or an integrated negotiation. A distributive negotiation is fundamentally a zero-sum game in which one is losing, one is winning. Whereas an integrative negotiation is somewhere when there is a situation in which both parties win. So it's a win-win for both of them. Now, often people confuse a commercial deal, which is a bargaining deal, with a distributive negotiation, which means that it's a zero-sum game. But you said that there are ways to make it an integrative negotiation as well by adding other non-commercial terms and pointers to the same commercial deal. And there you gave an example of, say, a salary or a salary negotiation, which is when someone probably of our age group is applying for a job. The only point that we might want to consider is the in-hand cash salary or the CTC, right? But for an employer or the other priorities can also be the location, your long-term continuation with the company, your termination period, ESOPs, etc., 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 right? And even for you, I think what can probably be important is the working culture that people you're reporting to. So by identifying all those terms, one might be able to negotiate on different pointers and might be able to prioritize something which is super important to them, and be also able to give something which is super important to other individual. I think the same, right?
You are correct, Ayush. You're well versed in this topic. I would say this to add to what you already said very well. It's important to not look at negotiations as either distributive or integrative. In many cases, like buying or selling a car on the street, or buying right. Let's say we're gonna negotiate for something. We're gonna barter with somebody at the flea market. That's over just a single issue. Inherently, that's distributive. But on most negotiations in the real world, we're smushing those together. We're smushing integrative and distributive together. And I think that's what most people misunderstand. A great negotiator can see how to make some things distributive, how to make some things integrative, in the sense of prioritizing them in their mind, separating them, and taking different approaches to a deal within each element, and not just seeing one side or the other. So I think this is very complementary to what you've already said.
Understood. Ben, I have a question on that. How should one identify that is this an integrative negotiation or a distributive? Or even if it comes across as a distributive negotiation, how should I go about converting it into an integrative negotiation by understanding those underlying benefits as well?
Not to oversimplify it, but start by asking really good open-ended questions. Why are you selling this car? Why are you renting the apartment? Now, some things we can't, we may violate a norm, or we don't want to violate confidences. We don't want to ask any questions that are illegal. but getting to understand not just a person's price point, but what their objectives are. What are their pain points? What are the challenges they're facing that are causing them to come talk with you? This will open the door to creating potential side deals and to trading value on things other than the price, right? So, to summarize, I think the key tactic to understanding if this is integrative, distributive, or both is asking great open-ended questions like why, when, how, etc.
Understood. But do you really think that the other individual will openly tell about his intentions or her intentions while entering into a negotiation deal?
Probably not, especially when it's culturally driven. If I were to walk into a car dealership and say, "Why are you selling this car?" It would probably laugh at me, right?
Of course.
So, part of understanding whether it's distributive or integrative is just simply knowing the rules of the game in advance. If you're buying or selling, ultimately, it's going to come down to distributive. And you need to be very good at that game. You need to understand all the finer points of distributive. You need to understand hardball tactics. You need to understand how to influence another person that may not be giving you information, the extent to trust them, etc. All right, but if you assume that every negotiation is distributive and you never ask questions, then you're putting a ceiling on how much value you can create for yourself.
Understood. So I think you mentioned about 2, 3 things. One is hardball tactics, and second is influencing people when it's about distributing negotiation, right? And in fact, even before that, you said that while you're entering into a negotiation, you should be aware about the context and be prepared. Can you just deep dive into that point and what do you really mean by preparing before entering into a negotiation?
Well, before I come to India, I need to know something about Indian culture. I need to understand how it differs from American culture. There's only so much I can read in a book, right? I can read about how business works in India. I can read about the caste system. I can read about different norms. But until I come to India and start negotiating and I make plenty of mistakes, I won't really understand beyond what I've read in the book. So I think a lot of preparation is making mistakes and learning from them.
But then how do you do it in a case when you only have one particular chance, right? It's either selling a car or not selling a car at the right price point.
Look, when I go in to sell a car or buy a car, I'm going in with a distributive mindset. That's it. Unless I'm dealing with a private seller or private buyer, it's pure distributive. That's all. So I think I don't want to make too much of this. Sometimes I get a reaction like, okay, you're talking a lot about integrative. That seems like fantasy land. That seems like something that doesn't apply to me. This applies to the world where it's a more complex negotiation. Maybe it will happen later in your career. It will happen outside of work, depending on what your work is. But let's not make any pretense that you can somehow, through your will or being a nice person, to create an integrative negotiation out of a distributive one. That's a fallacy. That's an error, and it can actually get on people's nerves.
Understood. Cool. So what you're saying is we'll have to, as a negotiator, come in and decide that this is a distributive negotiation or an integrative negotiation. If it's an integrative one, ask open-ended questions, try to understand the objective, because in most cases, one will be able to tell you if it's an integrative one, like by asking open-ended why, when, how questions. Versus if it's a distributive one, then go to hardball tactics and then use your influential skills that you might have, right? Understood.
And I wouldn't necessarily recommend hardball tactics if, on the face of things, you can certainly use them at the right time. I think the more important thing is how to prepare for them if somebody uses them against you.
Understood. Ben, can you just deep dive onto what are exactly hardball tactics and how does an individual use it against us?
Yeah. Well, there's volumes written about these. There's probably more than 100. I think ultimately it's about manipulation. It's about understanding the psychology of deal making, understanding ego. Nobody wants to look stupid. It's about understanding group dynamics and taking advantage of disagreement if a group is not unified. Let me give you an example of a classic one that you've already heard of and you might have used already, and that's good cop, bad cop, right? The idea of good cop, bad cop is that you establish a rapport with the person in front of you. You start sharing information with them. You become open with them. You trust them. But then they go back to some room where there may or may not be a real person. And that person makes the hard decisions and says no and so forth. The psychology of that is that you may fall victim to the temptation of sharing that information with this person and trying to help that person, even though they're not the decision maker. And what you're doing is you're wasting your time. They may influence you to spend more money than you have because you're trying to be a nice person to a lower level agent, even when that person in the back room doesn't exist. So whenever you experience a hardball tactic, it's best for you to call it out. That this is part of preparation. It's easy to learn about hardball tactics. You can just read a simple article about them. It explains how they work. It explains how to kind of anticipate them. And you can simply call it out, and that will send a signal to them that you are an experienced negotiator. One of the purposes of a hardball tactic is just to test how much you know. So if somebody, like, let's say, for example, if I go into a car dealership and the agent says, it would be really helpful if we just got your name and your email so that we could start a loan application. Okay? So if I just give them my email and my name without calling that tactic out, then they're going to know that I don't know what I'm doing. Right? If they start talking about having to clear something with their boss and I let them continue the negotiation, they're going to know that I'm pretty gullible. Right? So if anybody starts talking about their boss as a decision maker, I say, thank you so much. It's not worth my time to negotiate with you. I will not negotiate with anybody that's not the decision maker. Okay. This is when they now put you in a different category. Oh, they are an experienced negotiator. They know what they're doing. I have to treat this person more as a peer. Okay. So it's, now you may choose to be manipulative, and you can master these things. They do work, mostly for inexperienced parties. But they come at a price, and that price is trust. You lose trust. The long-term relationship suffers. But I would say one of the best things your listeners could do would be to get a hold of some reading, even some simple reading from basic negotiations materials, and identify the top 10 or top 20 hardball tactics, and coming up with a response for when they do it.
Understood. Can you tell some articles or any kind of resource material where viewers can fundamentally understand good tactics?
Yes. So Lewicki and Saunders have a textbook. They have several different textbooks. I think it's Roy Lewicki or Ray Lewicki and Ray Saunders. They're in the U.S. They have several negotiations textbooks that are freely available, like older versions of them that you can find on the internet. If you want to get the latest, you can purchase them. But these are it's the kind of the Bible of the core of negotiations. I know it's textbook material, but sometimes you just have to understand the basic tools. And you could even just Google what are the most are the 20 most common hardball tactics? They're very easily identified. You don't have to buy a textbook. You can just find it. It's kind of like learning a magic trick, right? If you don't know the magic trick, you can easily be deceived. But once you learn the trick, then you can do it, and that you can know how to respond when somebody tries to pull it on you.
Understood. So what you're saying is that in case of any hardball tactics, one should explicitly call it out and make the other person understand that, look, man, I know what you're trying to do with me, and don't try to fool me around or don't try to deceive me around.
Yeah, I like to say, is that how you want to play this? Right? I see that you're anchoring, you're doing good cop, bad cop, the nibble, the snow job. When you give it a name that everybody in the field knows, you say, okay, if that's how you want to do it, we can. I don't really have time for that. And then it becomes about your alternatives. Do you really want to mess with somebody who's playing hardball and who's trying to manipulate? That's the point where I normally walk away. But it depends on your alternatives and your power, your leverage.
In case of distributive negotiation, should we as an individual also use hardball tactics?
You should be capable and prepared to, and do as the Romans do, right? You have to understand the norms of the culture you're in. You have to understand the rules of the game. You have to figure it out, right? You have to observe the game for a while before you start playing it. I'm not a fan of hardball tactics, and I will tell you that seasoned negotiators don't use them.
Understood that. Is it because relationship gets hampered, right?
Relationships gets awkward, and it tends to just avoid the surfacing information that can make a deal advanced and profitable.
And
Now, I will say, if you're living in a world of buying and selling in the street, these higher order principles won't make any sense. They will seem like fairy tales. I get that. Play the game that you're in.
understood. When I now want to kind of shift gears from only negotiation to also influencing, and that is something we also mentioned while talking about integrative or distributive negotiation. So my question is what are the most common tactics an expert negotiator uses to influence people, and how should one utilize it while negotiating?
Yeah. This is a little bit of a repeat, and I can drill down. But you can influence the direction and tone of a conversation simply with questions. The questions you ask can take the person on the other side anywhere you want to go, especially if they don't know that you're doing it. Take a job interview. Job interviewees don't know how much power they have. They often don't even have questions that they've come with. They're missing out on an opportunity to guide that conversation. People love to talk about themselves. People love to talk. They love to correct. They love to direct. So the questions you ask can often get them into a mode where they're freely sharing information that's valuable to you. If they don't answer your questions, you can try other tactics like mirroring. Mirroring is when you simply repeat the last 1 to 3 words of a sentence, or you emphasize 1 or 2 words of a sentence, even if it's not the last ones. If they don't know what mirroring is, mirroring makes them feel good and causes them to elaborate. If you mirror somebody and you give pauses, it's more likely that they will talk. You can also use the correction technique. You can make a statement that summarizes what you think about what somebody said, intending for them to correct you. Okay. If they're not answering your open-ended questions, you can give us a statement that doesn't put them on the defensive, but goads them into telling you how it really is. There's nothing as kind of tempting as correcting another person in terms of getting information out. So those are three tactics that are used to influence people without having leverage or authority.
Understood. So you basically talked about saying that people like to talk about themselves. People like to share information, and they like to come across as smart individuals. That is the reason one should use techniques like mirroring or correction techniques to let them talk more and give them freely available information, right? So that you're not leaving anything on the table, right? Can you just give an example in order for this so that we are more clear on this as well?
Yeah. So I did a consulting project with a major dealership of a large manufacturer of commercial equipment here in the U.S. I won't share the company names. But what we were trying to do was assess the extent to which farmers in the United States were not using multi-million-dollar farming equipment. So the farming equipment in the world has gotten so sophisticated that you don't even need a driver anymore, right? You have AI and cameras piloting your tractor, and you have sprayers that go off like 10, 15 meters or longer. The cameras can identify the weed. They can select a certain pesticide for that weed and spray that individual weed with just micro droplets, all while the tractor's moving at 15 miles an hour. Okay, so this is called precision agriculture. My team and I were trying to assess why farmers weren't buying these multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment. And they did not like us asking. They did not like us asking because they didn't want to tell us the real answer. You know what the real answer was? It made them feel stupid. It made them feel stupid. They had been trained as farmers. They've been in farming 30 years, 40 years, 20 years. They had been raised on very kind of primitive tactics. A lot of the culture is about using your gut instinct, using intuition, the old farmer's almanac. Okay. They didn't want to admit that they didn't like using these tools because they didn't know how to use a computer. They didn't know how to operate all the fancy gadgets. And ultimately, it made them feel stupid. So when it came down to a financial decision, they just ignored all the data that showed they could be more profitable because it was more important for them to feel successful. That came by me sending some interviewers that were asking open-ended questions that were not threatening to them.
Can you give me an example of that open-ended question?
Yeah. What are the worst things that you've encountered in using precision ag equipment? Okay, there's a technique called laddering. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's called laddering. Laddering is when you start at the top and you keep going down by asking additional why questions. All right. So you let's say you said, well, why do you not buy these expensive sprayers that cost $1.3 billion? And I might say, well, it's too expensive. And you might come up with another why question. What are some of the barriers you're facing that are driving up your costs? Why is cost becoming more of an issue now? Okay. So what happens is what you're trying to do with asking a series of follow-up why questions is to dig down to the core of human psychology to understand the root cause. The root cause in this case was really, as I said, it was a irrational decision for them. They saw that other farmers were making more money in the long run with the expensive equipment. They saw the ROI on paper, but they kept coming up with excuses based on their own ego for ignoring that information. So it takes a series of just persistent asking why. You've heard 5 whys. It's similar to laddering. You just keep drilling down to try to get to the root of it. And it's part science, it's part art form.
Understood. I think you mentioned about human psychology, right? And it has been years now you've been really dealing into negotiation and you've been consulting large MNCs. I would like to understand that what are certain human instincts or biases that you have come across that we as individuals can utilize while going into a negotiation?
Yeah, there are lots of them, and we can always assume that humans are irrational. Count on that. Any research study that assumes that is probably going to find evidence in support of their hypotheses. One of them is what we call the agreement bias. The agreement bias is, I didn't succeed if I didn't reach a deal, right? We spend time talking to somebody, we call on a client, we call on a customer, we might invest a lot of our energy. We might have our ego riding on this because we have a commission. And we assume, oh, I didn't get a deal. That does not mean you failed. What you fail when you fail to reach your objectives, right? If I buy a car for more money than I have, I made a deal, but I didn't reach my objective. I wanted to buy a car within my budget. I wanted to buy a car that would allow me to accomplish my goal. Maybe I have some other goal. Maybe I have a goal to graduate from college, and I need a car to get me through that. Well, if I've suddenly bought a car that now puts me farther in debt and makes it harder, now I have to take another job and I do worse in college. Yeah, I got a deal, but I didn't reach my goal.
Understood. So one is agreement bias. What are the other ones?
Agreement bias is common. I would say we tend to want to always save face. We don't want to look stupid. This allows people to capitalize on our pride. I don't know, I've never bought a car in India. I've bought several in the United States. And when you go to a dealer, for example, Ayush, there are probably between 5 to 8 different fees that are connected to the state government that I have never heard of.
Yes.
Right? I've never heard of these things, and they add a bunch of paperwork. They add their own. They'll put a clause for the undercoating. They can spray some kind of undercoating on a car, and they will bury you with about 10 meters of stuff that you don't understand. Okay, this is called the snow job. Snowing. It's putting information in front of you that you probably don't understand and making you uncomfortable, and you don't know what questions to ask. You don't know what's baloney and what isn't. And instead of admitting that, you'll just sign it all. You just sign all the pork that they put into that deal because you don't want to look bad. You don't want to look stupid. And they understand this. They have their own language. Right? This is what they train their salespeople on. It's not all that complicated, but people don't buy cars that much. Maybe once every 5 years or 7 years, and the average consumer doesn't understand all these fees and the laws. They prey on your lack of knowledge and your inability to come across as stupid.
I think it's always said that jargons are made for stupid and not smart.
Yeah.
So that summarizes the point on why people not want to look stupid. Right?
And you see business models pop up on this. In the United States, there are several dealerships that advertise no negotiations. There's a single price. They want people to come in that don't like negotiations, and what they do is just simply jack up the price of the car. They say, all right, the people that are going to come into our shop they're willing to forego, they're willing to pay more to avoid being stupid.
Fair. Understood.
if you can understand, if you can arm yourself before you go into a deal by understanding all the laws and all the little things that are legit and not legit, then you can call them out. When somebody brings me an like an undercoating, I say, please don't waste my time. I know the 3 things you have to get done under the state of Indiana. Let's just focus on that. And when it comes to car buying, I always start with the price first. I don't get into anything else. I agree on the price, and then we could talk about loans. Then we can talk about fees and extras. They want to always upsell.
Understood, sir. Ben, I think when you were teaching us, you used this very good phrase on saying that you're agents to act and not to be acted upon, right? And I think that was just one of the most important statements I took away from the entire course. Would you like to deep on that statement as well, please? Wow, so you used so while you were teaching the entire course, you used a statement saying that you are agents to act and not to be acted upon, right? And that was one of my biggest learnings in the course. I would love if you can also deep dive on that particular statement.
Okay, sorry, I missed the deep dive part. You cannot control another person. They decide what they do. They decide what they feel. They decide how much information to give you or not. They decide how much to trust you. They decide how much influence that you have over them. Not your position, not your title, not your number of alternatives, not your leverage. Ultimately, it's them. And once you understand that, then it makes sense why you wouldn't just automatically start using hardball tactics or manipulation or competition or aggressive, low ball, high ball tactics, anchoring, these other things that we could dive into. It's fundamentally a choice. And when you're talking about long-term relationships, when you treat people as agents to act rather than objects to be acted, they're more likely to reciprocate. They're more likely to share information with you. They're more likely to focus on problems rather than winning, or trying to claim value, because then you become partners. The best way to become more influential is to give power rather than take it. This is complicated in negotiations because we typically start out without trust. We typically start out viewing ourselves as adversaries, withholding information. But as we gain trust, as we gain momentum, and begin sharing more information, by sharing control, based on that principle of agency, much greater detail, and much more greater details, I should say, more information can be given, and more profits can be had.
Understood. No, I think that gave me a lot of clarity on how one should go about becoming a good negotiator, or at least the tactics one should use to become a good negotiator, or one should avoid both ends of the spectrum. Then I would now want to shift the gears from negotiation to giving some actionable insights to 20-year-old. So since this podcast will be fundamentally watched by 18 to 24, I would like to understand if you have certain suggestions for people watching this podcast today. How can one go about inculcating negotiation skills by design and not by chance?
Okay. Well, I'll be very tactical here, and I will keep it simple. The first is that you should always understand what your purpose is. And there may be multiple purposes, but write them down. Okay. Second, understand your resistance point. Your resistance point is the point at which you would walk away from the deal. For buyers, it's the most you'd be willing to spend. For sellers, it's the least you'd be willing to go for something that you own. Okay? That is determined by your alternatives. Make a list of all of the alternatives you have to buying or selling this thing today. Okay? then identify the best of those alternatives. We call that the BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. One of the most powerful things that any beginning negotiator can do, and even a seasoned one, is to have a clear BATNA before going into any discussion. Let that BATNA determine the price of your resistance point. Okay? That's your walk-away point. If you cannot do better than that resistance point, then walk away. Walk away from the deal. Okay? Then understand what your initial offer should be. In a distributive in a distributive negotiation in real life, you want to exaggerate your initial offer. You never want to tell the other party what your resistance point is. Okay? Through persuasion, through psychology, you're hoping to claim as much of that value as you can. And also identify what you would consider to be a reasonable aspiration. Okay, if I know my target or my resistance point and my initial offer, I should also have a goal in mind that should be connected back to my most important purpose. Then try to do research on what the other party's alternatives are. You should always try to anticipate their BATNA. In fact, their resistance point is far more important than yours. They won't tell you most likely what that is, but you can discern it through your own research and by them showing through their concessions that you're probably getting close to their resistance point. If you can do those handful of things, you're going to significantly enhance your ability to do well, to do better than your best alternative. That is a basic metric for understanding success.
Understood. I think this was fundamentally a step-by-step process to go about good negotiation. I think towards the fag end, I'll just reiterate everything we've discussed from the get-go. And please correct me if I have missed something. So we essentially started with understanding what really negotiation is, in which you told that negotiation is not only about commercial negotiation or what you could term as bargaining negotiation, it's also about problem solving. Within problem solving comes problem identification, which fundamentally means that what are you exactly and like why are you exactly entering into a negotiation for? What are your aspirations and what are your purpose while entering into negotiation, right? Post which we went to discussing about the different type of negotiation in which we touched base upon integrative and distributive negotiations. Integrative negotiation is a situation in which there's a win-win for both the parties, and distributive is fundamentally zero-sum. In most cases, when commercial negotiation comes across as distributive, it might not really be distributive because there are other underlying benefits every individual is looking at. During which you gave an example of a job offer, in which it's not only the CTC or the in-hand, it's also the location, the teammates, from an employee's perspective versus from an employer, it might be the lock-in duration, the vesting period, or other kind of intangible networks that a employer also brings into the table, right? So one, while entering into negotiation, also needs to understand those implicit benefits one might also want, right? And that could be done by asking open-ended questions upon why, when, how, and all that stuff, right? Post which you discussed about saying that distributive negotiation can be handled by hardball tactics and influencing people. When we discussed hardball tactics, you advised not to use hardball tactics, but to call out hardball tactics whenever one is using that. And hardball tactics can be anchoring or good cop, bad cop, or any of those kind, for which you recommended a couple of readings to understand that better, right? While we were talking about influencing, you mentioned about techniques like mirroring, correction technique, and laddering, because humans want to be heard, they want to feel smart, and that can only happen when you give them a chance to speak. So by mirroring, you will end up repeating a couple of words which the last person said. Correction technique is fundamentally summarizing it and asking the other person, am I right, am I wrong? And laddering is fundamentally asking whys in everything to understand the root cause analysis, right? After which we discussed about certain human instincts that you have captured or you have fundamentally understood over a bit of time that you think can be used in negotiation. And there you fundamentally highlighted upon two of the major one, which is agreement bias, which means that every individual wants to and wants to have an agreement to a negotiation and feels that an agreement is a win to a negotiation, whereas it's actually understanding what was your purpose. Second is everyone wants to feel smart. So there you give the example of their farming company consulting and how because despite being commercially a good project, they were not using it because it's felt that they will not come across as smart and stuff, right? So those kind of tactics can be used while you're going to negotiation. And the fun part that there are businesses being built around that as well. So towards the fag end, I think this is an entire playbook about negotiation. You started by saying that understand your purpose, why you are entering into a negotiation, write it down, write down 2, 3 underlying benefits also you might be looking at and then prioritize it, right? Then have a resistance point to each and every benefit. It might be commercial, it might be a non-commercial benefit. Then understand what are your alternatives. And this resistance point will fundamentally come from your alternatives, which you define as your BATNA, followed by understanding what will your initial offers be, and your aspiration as well. So there are 3 things before going into a negotiation: your initial offer, your resistance point, and an aspiration or the point you feel that people fundamentally be closed, right? Uh, and apart from that, you'll also have to do a research on the other negotiator by understanding their partner and their initial offer as well. That can be done by understanding their history, probably down to their colleagues, etc. To then understanding and asking open-ended questions. And that's how you fundamentally go about cracking a deal which has no money left on the table for anyone, right? Am I right? Am I missing something?
Oh, you're a quick study, Ayush. Great summary.
Well, thank you so much. I think this was super, super helpful to large extent. I've actually got an entire summary of the entire course, and I'm damn sure a lot of my viewers might also have very good gist of it. Any recommendation you might want to give to anyone in their 20s about how they, yeah.
Yeah, I would just say don't be afraid of mistakes. Mistakes are a great teacher. The only big mistake you'll ever make is the one you don't learn from.
Okay, so don't be afraid of mistakes. That's the ultimate suggestion. But I think thank you so much, Ben. This was generally a stellar podcast. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure that my viewers will also enjoy it while doing it. Thank you so much for being a part of the podcast and looking forward to having a chat again.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ayush.